So I've been having this dilemma lately. There's cat hair everywhere in this house. I'll clean this house from corner to corner, sweep it, vacuum it, wash the walls, scrub it down, and then like a month later, there's like there's like sand and lint and dust and bits of like cat hair, cat litter, cat vomit, cat a part of a cat toy, pieces of the furniture, little pieces of foam or whatever the cats are clawing on, and they spread it around the house. So it's really been difficult for me. And now there's been this. It's been the worst year for fleas. So I tried the drops, and they worked for about a couple of days, and then the fleas just started infestating again on the cats. So what I did is I waited, right? Because you put the poison on, you're not supposed to put any other thing on. You follow the instructions in the package. It says not to use any of that after a certain period of time. Let it get out of the system of the cats. So I waited, right? And then while I'm waiting for these, they're fleas on the cats. So I'm trying to keep them on the yard or around my house. So they're inside, and it's been hot and they've been outside. So the neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, so and so, she's all ranting and raving and really upset that the cat got out, and it's your cat, you're responsible for that cat. That cat is your property. This is my property, my house, my domain. I don't know. You want your animal over here on my property." So she was getting really like mad about it. She was almost yelling and almost to the point of screaming at me. All right. So I said, "Well, come on, be reasonable. The cat's had fleas, and the cat normally doesn't come over here. I mean, if the cat's over here, you should call me, let me know, and I'll come over and get my cat and bring him home." So she's going to call the animal control, or she's going to call the county because of animal abuse. So she's accusing me of abusing my animal because she's saying that my cat is like skin and bones. It's starving to death. Well, it's been like 98 degrees outside, right, or 100 degrees, and the cats are laying around in the yard, and they're not really that hungry, right? On top of that, there's a flea infestation. I'm dealing with it. I'm trying to get the right medication. I'm trying to following the instructions on the packaging about how much the drug to use. So the cats They don't leave my property. I feed them and I water them, and they're fine here in my property. So I went and I tried to apologize, but she was just, I left, right? Her husband came out and started yelling at me, right? So I left, and then I went home and I made sure all my cats were in the house. I put all their litter boxes back in the house. I put water bowls in the house. I put all their food dishes and their blankets and toys, some of their toys, and I bring them in the house, and now I'm locking the doors and the windows and keeping them inside the house all the time. Since obviously I offended my neighbor by letting my cat I wasn't watching my cat, right? And he got out and he went down the street and he was begging food from her, and and there's another stray cat in the neighborhood, and people think that cat's my cat or it belongs to me. And it comes around once in a while. I give it a little bit of food, but I don't own that cat. I've never said she had to be in the house in the winter time when it was freezing out. And then I bought some of these pads, and it's a plastic pad. This is going to take one moment. I'll be right back. So the reason I need to see a psychiatrist is because of my inability to to accept that just people are use animals as tools, that people make slaves out of other animals and then they eat their body parts and make things from the skin and that. And I have to accept that most of society, 99.9% of the people out in the world, are meat eaters, or eat meat all the time, or drink milk and eat cheese and bacon and ham and salmon and tuna. And I understand you're just raised that way. You're brought up in your family, wherever you was as a kid, that they always just fed you like eggs and bacon in the morning, ham sandwiches or turkey sandwiches. They Every meal was meat. That's a natural normal thing in your family. So when I became vegan now, it's like I'm at odds with everybody on ethically, because because what's considered normal to be a normal person, right? Um, I don't think that's I don't think they're ethically correct. I think they're not being true to ethical principles to a degree. I mean, you could use a scale, right? If there's a scalar, if there's a category, you could put a number 1 to 10 on a scale and say number one would be um, a, a Eskimo lives in the Arctic, eats fish all the time, and seal or caribou, or once in a while maybe some sea kelp, and they live on the ocean, right? They're living on ice right out on the ocean as Eskimos. So there's no banana trees, there's no orange trees, there's no walnut groves, there's no rice paddies or potatoes growing where they live, that they could just normally sustain themselves if they lived near a Trader Joe's, or there was a Whole Foods market nearby, or they had regular scheduled Amazon delivery and pickup or delivery at their house, or grocery delivery at their house. If like their oranges and bananas and walnuts and their grains and whole grains and all their fruit and vegetables that they would want to eat if they could choose. Oh, I'd like to be vegan, right? It'd be nice if I could have all the variety of different foods and enough to satisfy um, my homeostasis, my minerals, and my levels of protein and vitamins and that, and it sustain that in my body at a normal level. But living out in the brush, or living way out in the country, where for everybody that's got a job, they're either working on oil wells, or they're a truck driver, or they work at a cattle ranch. They or they work at a big chicken farm or a turkey farm, or they raise pigs, and they do that for a living, and it's a legitimate way to make a living. And they breed animals, so they force the organism to come into existence by breeding, and then they multiply that one. They pick out that one particular those those features about that animal, the way the meat tastes, how much water it drinks, and how much it weighs, and they factor in all the costs of how much it costs to raise the animal, and then it gets to a certain age and they just sell them. And they do that. Their dad and their mom, their uncles, and they do that work. They've done that work too, and their grandparents did it, and they live on the same land that their great grandparents settled on. And so you're telling someone, oh no, you can't eat meat. Meat is wrong. It's unethical, right? And you're not. From my perspective, I see all these animals as pets most of the time, except maybe flies sometimes, or insects. If they're bothering me, I want to get rid of them. I want to get them away from me. Like, so I need maybe to see a psychiatrist to see whether or not I have a mental illness, because I think animals on the farm have consciousness. I think these animals that we breed for food and we use for entertainment and clothing and furniture and car seats or whatever, handbags, belts, gloves, boots, and that sort of thing. We're using parts of this animal, and the animal had its own life, right? Do you get what I'm saying? People like me, I imagine that I myself could be that animal. I could be living and existing in a state of consciousness just like that farm animal. That's what I think. And that might be, some people might say I'm mentally ill, that because I believe that just the slightest, maybe a slightest, smallest possibility that a farm animal, a pig, a cow, a chicken, a turkey, a fish, or a seal or a walrus or any other kind of marine life or elephant or a large mammal they have their own sense of themselves. So they're living out a life inside, trapped inside of that form that they are. They can't articulate their own experiences. They can't relate that symbolically in an abstract form like a human being could. A human animal, they're abstract. They can make letters and they can record their thoughts with writing, and animals can't do that. But animals can, like, they know, they love their young. They have emotions. They feel. They get sad. They can get depressed. They can get lonely. And when they're in agonizing pain, when the animal is writhing in pain and they're just going through excruciating suffering, when the animal has to suffer just terrible, terrible suffering states of being, they're in a pen and they're really hot and it's all crowded and there's flies around and it's noisy and the ground is all muddy and they're uncomfortable. It's an unpleasant situation for that critter to be in, but it's always the bottom line. It's always like, well, it's going to cost so and so such and such amount to take their time out to take care of one animal, as if that was someone's pet, right? So if all the farm animals were a pet, I mean, would it be, maybe some cultures they'll eat a dog and it's normal. They'll eat dog food. They'll eat dog meat like the same way someone eats cow meat. It don't matter. It's just whatever the meat tastes like, and that's all they care about. And the law says they're allowed to do that, the law of their land. So, but over here, the people would go, "Oh no, they can't do that with dogs. Oh no, my gosh, we have to stop them. They're doing that to dogs. They're capturing dogs and putting them in little cages, poking them, and then they slice their throats and hang them upside down and cut them all up and eat them and barbecue them. We can't have that. No, that's wrong." And then we over here, we do that with a cow or a pig or so, it's kind of, and even if you think you're getting away from even if you think you're not harming an animal by being a vegan or vegetarian vegan, right? Then there's still they still have to put things in the soil. So in order for soil to be healthy and fertile and grow plants, you have to have input from animals, herbivores. So it's, and even all the drugs you've ever taken or used, medications wise, and even medical treatments, there was some animal that was experimented on in a laboratory to test that product, whatever's being used on you. If it's be having surgery on you and you're taking some medication, it might be medication they distilled down from the gallbladder of some animal or the liver or some part of an animal. They cut it up and they just use that one part and they can make medication from it. But all these medications they had to test on animals. So even at one time in your life, maybe you were on a prescription drug and that was tested on an animal. So you got to think of even if you're vegan, you're still all these inventions and things that we benefit from, and good things and noble things. The people that made those things, they weren't all vegan. The people that lived in history, throughout history, that were early adapters, writing, and they learned how to write things down, create paper, and preserve language. And they were really good at keeping records, right? So they had civilizations could start, and there was people, wise men there that they know how to read and write. So all those people weren't vegan, right? So the vegan thing is like, it'd be really hard to live in a wild, right, and be a vegan. If you had to go, imagine going out into the woods just like you are right now, or wherever you are. If there's a wild area around where you live at, go there and sit there all day long, take a thing of water and just sit in that wild place, and then start thinking about, what if I was a person back in time and I was in that situation in the past. So we are, it was, I think, I don't know whose, I should footnote, I shouldn't say these are my ideas, right? Because I've heard these ideas before and I'm just repeating them. Like early hominid people, humanoids, right? They were before the modern human that we are today. They couldn't read or write. Okay, so they had to make drawings on the cave walls. They probably made a lot of carvings in wood that are lost today just because it deteriorated. So it really has to rely upon caves and what we find buried in the soil inside of a cave, or in the dirt. Explore caves really well, and we might find really old Paleolithic artifacts from that. So they find like a woman, like women made these fertility dolls, right? I guess they were like little clay figurines, like fat women, right? And they were for fertility rites or whatever. So there's a history of the human race that's just like lost. It's like no one wrote anything down. There wasn't styluses and clay tablets that were readily and immediately available for people. They didn't have the time. They didn't have the patience or the time to sit with a stylus and make make letters on a clay tablet. It was only up until when people were farming, and then they would preserve the food through hard times, that communities got together and people had to rely on each other. So you had to rely on the butcher, you had to rely on the baker, you had to rely on the candlestick maker, you had to rely on the tailor, you had to rely on the well digger, you had to rely on the soothsayer that could help with medical things. They have pharmacopoeia. You had to, everything that you do now, you still had to do in the past, but they didn't have the variety of foods. Only in certain places in the world, like maybe India and the Indus Valley and Burma and Thailand, where that is today, and Vietnam even, there was probably enough of vegetation type foods that people didn't really need to eat meat that often. They could grow greens, and they had nuts, and they had fruit, and they had that mostly. So it wasn't only until there was a need for fire, right? As soon as people adopted fire and they had a fire, they were able to make a fire kit, either with a flint, or they had a bow made out of hair, and they wove the hair together and they put it on a piece of elm bark, or whatever that wood that bends, it has good. So they were able to make a bow and a wood mandrel, and carve a line in it and put some pieces of dry grass in there, and make fires from that. They learned how to consistently make a fire whenever they needed a fire. So it was really important. People probably did try to carry a fire around in a container. If you see that movie Quest for Fire, they did that. But most of the meat eating was only done up until the people were using fire. Before people used fire, they could make jerky, right? If you were living on the seashore and the tide went out and there were pools of water and they evaporated and there was salt. It was really salty there, and you could scrape that salt. You could skin an animal, right, or slice an animal up with the raw meat, and then just put a whole bunch of salt that meat really good, and let it sit in the sun and dry out. I guess that would be like a way of early humans hunting and then eating their meat. So maybe I could be wrong, but I just presume that somebody smelled some burning, right? That some monkey man, human monkey hybrid, whatever. He smelled the smell of the meat burning. He smelled the barbecue, right? That was the first time a human smelled the barbecue. What that was there was like a brush fire, and there might have been a rabbit or a gazelle or some critter in there caught in the fire, and they got burnt up. And the human out there in the jungle, he's eating some dry fruit, right? He's bought dry fruit. He's got a big pile of dry fruit. He's eating the fruit, right? And he's picking up grub worms too. He's looking under logs and he picks up a grub worm and eats a grub worm. But the monkey man sniffs the air and he smells that thing that got burnt up in the fire. That animal that was in a fire got trapped, and now they're just charred animal there that's smoldering and smoking. The guy's out in the jungle eating his fruit and his grubs and his tubers, right? He's munching on leaves, and now he smells that. And he smells it and he goes, wow, that smells kind of interesting. That might be smells good. Actually, I could eat that, right? So he follows the trail of the smoke. He can smell really good, way better than anyone can smell today, believe me. So he finds the carcass of the animal. It's smoldering and burning. And he's just like, oh, wow, that smells. He starts salivating and taking a sharp rock and cutting it off and not chewing on it. So, this is really good. Wow. Maybe take some back to his people back at where they're living in the caves or in the rocks over the camp, right? And that was probably meat eating. That was probably the first time human forms ate meat, or maybe they were fighting each other. Maybe one male was fighting another male, and they bit into each other, and they ripped out their jugular vein. One of the guy's teeth were really sharp, and he bit on the other guy. They were wrestling over these females, right? These pretty girls. So they were fighting over the girls, right? And then the one guy took his teeth and he took a big bite out of the other monkey man's neck. He was chewing the bloody meat of the other monkey in his mouth, like that. But that was probably the only time humans ate meat. Most of the time, I think, in early humans, hundreds of thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, and probably up until the big volcano went off in the Mount Toba eruption. So the Mount Toba eruption was the beginning of a big catastrophic event, because everything winterized the world, right? It set into the atmosphere plumes of vapor that blocked the sunlight, spread out over the earth, and it caused really cold spells to happen. And they say that there's a genetic bottleneck there. They that they guess there's only a few thousand people in the world, like 72,000. They think it happened, or they've measured something that it happened like 72,000 years ago or 71,000 years ago. But what must have happened is, if there was any people that were living in the jungles, the lush, green, fertile jungles with the grassy areas, and that people were probably there was probably a lot of humans, and then it got really cold, and the people that didn't know how to use fire to keep warm, they all died off. So the people that were left were the people that knew how to use fire, and they could keep warm. They went in the cave. They had food stored. They were Cro-Magnon preppers, right? So these these Paleolithic people, they were preppers, the first preppers. The winter came and they were ready. They had all the potatoes in the storage room. They had all their salted meat. They had their fire bundle. They could go in the cave and they could start fires and stay warm and have plenty to eat, and they could entertain themselves and make cave paintings and that. So, and then most of the people that were living outside that didn't know how to use fire and keep warm, right? They died off. So there was only maybe, they say there was only a few thousand people at that point in time, and everybody that's alive today, throughout all we know, our own history, all those people are descended from those like couple thousand people back in that time. So that was the total population of the whole earth. The human population was like around 10,000 people at one time. So, I mean, and there's other geologic events that have happened that weren't recorded by humans. They didn't write it down. There wasn't a news reporter guy that had a stylus, and he was carrying around his clay tablets all the time. And when something happened, he'd just start writing down the clay tablet the event as it happens. He's writing it down right there as the event's happening. No, it didn't happen that way. What happened was people told stories to each other. That was and they remembered the stories. Their grandparents and their parents told them stories of what happened to them before they were. When they were young, and they were children, and they just told stories. And there was floods, right? It was probably the ice. The ice was melting after the ice age, and what happened was the sea level rose really fast because there was a sudden inflow of ice off of and meltwater off of these pools of water that were dammed up by these ice dams, and they spilt over out into the land, and they flooded into the ocean, and it caused the sea level to rise significantly. So wherever these people were living in the Middle East, it was probably Mesopotamia, maybe where Baghdad is today. That whole inland sea, that whole sea there in there was probably dry land, and maybe it was farmland and really lush countryside, and the people could live there pretty easy. It was nice. And then the water came in and just flooded that area. The sea level rose, and the ocean water just came in and flooded that whole area out. So that could have been a significant event. And then people talked about that. Oh, they told their kids about the Great Flood, and then their grandchildren told their children about the Great Flood. And then when they had children, they told their children about the Great Flood and what happened during the flood. And this flood, what had occurred, and there was a family that got away because they were listening to the divine. And there are independent stories from the Pentateuch that aren't in the Mosaic writings. There is like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and there's a whole history of the Mesopotamian area of how the people lived, and they were they were the ones that started granaries, and that gave them the ability to have leisure time and time enough to learn how to write and learn how to read and make writing symbolic, right? Preserve, written, record things. But people ate. I don't know. I think that the meat that's for me is like I can't go to picnics, right? I don't want to go to people's houses where they're having barbecues. I don't want to. I don't really enjoy having meals with people anymore. I don't really want to be. I don't want to eat around someone that's eating meat, or I prefer just to stay at home, be by myself, explore my library that I have, get interested in learning again. Not spending so much time on the stock market, looking at the stock market, reading about this company, reading about that company, looking at their financials, comparing their financials, looking at the comparing graphs, studying charts, um, listening to conference calls, um, watching interviews with CEOs. And I'm trying to understand how to invest, in the stock market, and sometimes it's like I get mixed messages from the world, right? When I say the world, I mean mostly YouTube. But I read the news too. I go to like Google News, or I go to Yahoo News, or I go to the Bloomberg, or I go to the market news, and I see certain patterns, but not always. They don't always repeat, right? Like a stock, it'll just sell off like a real sharp, just boom, like that, a really steep drop. It's like the bids and the ask, right? The bids and the asks, it must go all the way down way down to all of those, all the ones that are asked, right, or asking at a certain price. There's only a few of those, right? And the price really changes dramatically as they go down on the ask side. So your bid is like, if somebody bids really high and they got a huge amount of money, it's just going to take that on that column. It's just going to bring those numbers down, jump down fast like that. So it's one. And I don't see, if somebody's an account manager and they're managing an account and they do a sell like that, or they then that's like, they're like, I don't know if they're doing that. If they do that and they're making money, they want to preserve their money, so they see a risk in the future. So they're looking at the company and they see something that's going to happen in the future. They know, and they in their own mind, they're like, oh, I better get out of this. So they sell it like that, and they have a whole bunch of it. It's just not one person that has a couple hundred shares, or a few shares here, a few shares there. It's not a whole lot. It's not like normally a whole bunch of people would be asking a certain amount, and they'd have an order in that says, I want to sell the stock, but I'm only going to sell it at this price. And then they put their order in and they say, let it ride for 30 days or all day long, and extended hours trading. So they put a limit order in there and it sits there. And there's all these other people that have limit orders in there too. And they're sitting there. But then when someone and the asking is like, they're little nibbles, nibble here, nibble there. And it's just like they're nibbling. And they're not taking a big chunk and selling it, right? So, well, the bids and the ask. Yeah. And then listening to the conference call. And sometimes there's an excuse, right? The CEO or the financial officer, they give a legitimate reason why the share price has come down, why the company's sales have come down, right? So they can't control the share price. I shouldn't have said that. They don't know how the stock will perform any more than most the other people, analysts out there, do too. So but they have a better idea, right? They're willing to be on a board of directors, and they're willing to try to keep a company running, even if it means borrowing money to just keep it going, because they think in the future they just keep borrowing money to get it, and then at a certain point in time it'll take off. Timing will be positioned, it'll be poised in the environment of the economy, right? That kind of business will do really well, and the people want their product all of a sudden. But when the thing hit, right, in 2020 in 2021, and people had to stay put, then which I retired then anyways, and my wife passed away. So all that was happening, it was like same time that was happening, those things happened to me. But when everyone was like not working, when they told people they couldn't gather together and be in elevators and be in public transportation, and people had to wear masks, and they didn't know how contagious it was, and how harmful it was to just people of normal age that are working in the working community, or people, the young people, which turns out it was just like people that were compromised already. If you were diabetic and you had high blood pressure and you had a compromised immune system to begin with, and you were just a weak person, then you could get it more easily. And then if you were exposed around a lot of people that had it, and you worked as a healthcare worker, and you were breathing in the air with all the other people around you, breathing in the same air. So you had to put a face shield and wear the double mask and gloves, and be in a clean room, right, with a special airflow from laminar airflow from the ceiling in a hospital, right? So what I didn't get was if it was about public health and safety, if the politicians were really concerned about public health and safety, then there would have been more efforts to install air purifiers and put air filtration systems in public areas where there's a lot of crowds of people, maybe in like hubs or train stations, airports, anywhere where there's bus stations or people are traveling, right? All those places where the public is gathering, maybe even sporting events or concerts, or like indoor functions where there's a lot of people crowded together in a single room. There had to be some way of filtering the air. That's what I was thinking. I kept thinking we got to have air filters everywhere. If people don't want to wear a mask, then there should be the air that they're in the air when they're around other people should be blowing like down from the ceiling, or there should be precautions taken in the ventilation system to accommodate future types of airborne viruses or bacterium or any kind of microorganism that's airborne. They should have air filtration that inhibits the spread through the atmosphere of these deadly organisms, or these contagions, these flus, right, or whatever the flu is that's coming from a droplet in the midst of someone's coughing or sneezing. Then that sneeze or that coughing, that airborne, or somebody shouting or yelling, or they're singing too in a choir, all that air that's coming out of those people's bodies, if there's somebody that's there that's breathing in and out and has an organism that's coming out of them, and then all the other people are having to breathe the same air, or they're close in proximity and they're breathing the air off that person's body, then then we need to have certain precautions need to be taken about public safety, about health and well-being of especially people, like if they pay to go to a concert, or they're in an expensive building, right, and they have an elevator and everybody in the building has to ride up and down these elevators. You're stuck in the same limited space as all these other people, so they need to have the elevator that people are in, or even the subway train. Those places need to have an superior air filtration system installed, and it needs to be fully operational at peak hours when everybody's using that. So I'm saying, it doesn't need to be on all the time. It's just when there's so many people in that stuck together in the train car, or in the elevator, or in a hallway, or walking in, or there's a passageways, or there's a lot of crowds of people that are walking around and they're breathing the same air. People are coughing and they're walking. So you're nearby, other people are sneezing, right, and you're following them, and there's other people that are coming the other way, and those areas they need to for public safety. They need to install air filtration systems, or even have a UV light. Have a fan on a UV light too. They could do that. Which actually, I've noticed that in the train cars now. So if they put more emphasis on health and hygiene, also, and it made people more, aware of their diet and the kinds of people at the grade school level. I mean, if there's foster children and the foster children are being cared for, then the public schools that take care of the foster children, they need to learn health, that they need to wash their hands and how to be safe and have good hygiene. They need to learn about um, preventing accidents, how to not cut yourself, how to be safe with fire, how to use household cleaners, how to just be live, and live hygienically, and be a responsible person, and teach them about learning how to handle money, and dealing with their finances, so that they don't do stupid things when they're younger with their time. And but I don't see it seems to me, I shouldn't say that so much. It sounds dumb, I know. Well, it's just from my point of view. Maybe I'm uninformed, and that the farm animal is like it's like if somebody made a robot and they put like a feathers on it, and they made a little beak and eyeballs, and they could make the beak go up and down, the eyeballs roll around with a machine, with a mechanism. And that little animal in the farm, that was just like a little tiny little mechanical thing, right? There was no, it was just a piece of machinery. It was a property. It was owned in property. It was created. It's being used for a specific purpose, and then it's taken away, and new ones are created, and then they're taken away, and there's nothing that's happening to anyone there. So someone that thinks, they emote and they worry, and that animal, I could be that animal, I could reincarnate and be that animal, I could come back as that type of animal on this planet. And they get distressed about that, or they see that maybe they were something like that before they were this as a human being. They were born, well, they're born as a human being, and then it just happens that way. It's like randomness. It's just like the universe. The laws of nature just have arranged themselves in such and such a way over time, through a cascade of cause and effect, that they're born as this human animal, and they see another kind of animal. It's like got a brain, like they have a kind of a brain, but it's smaller. It has eyeballs, it has ears, it has a skin it could feel. And I'm crazy. Hey, get a grip on life. You're nuts. You need help. You need to commit yourself. You should be put into and watched. You need to be an institution, and given you need to go to therapy classes, and have like art therapy, and have a meditation class, and go in the swimming pool, and then they'd have a gymnasium you could use, and they have like a nice area where they have picnics, and it was all vegan, right? You need to go to a hospital that was just for vegan people, and only vegan people were there, and everybody that worked there was vegan, and everybody that had to be at the institution, they had to be put because they were crazy. So the rest of society said, oh, they're crazy, put them in an institution. So they're having to be in this institution for vegan people that are too emotional, they're too sensitive, and they can't handle life. So someone will say to them, well, just accept it, get over it. That's the circle of life. They keep talking about the circle of life, like, okay, you're born, you live this life, yeah, you get to learn, you get to grow up, you get to be an adolescent, you have all your feelings, you're hungry, you have sexuality, you experience this through your life. You start to get old, and then you get older, and then you get decrepit, and then your body starts falling apart. Everything hurts, and then you can't. It's hard for you to get up, and then you got to shit on yourself, and then you die. And then someone else is born, a little tiny baby comes into existence, and then they're crawling, and then they grow up, and they become a little toddler, and then they're an adolescent, and then they go through puberty, then they're an adult, and they work, and they work, and they go to school, and they work, and they get old, and they get play games, and then they have a little bit of fun, and they get sore, and then they get tired, and they get more tired. They start to get forgetful, and then people around them have to take care of them, and then they just die. And then a little baby's born again. That's the circle of life, right? And you're like, well, why is that? You know, you ask the question, and the people that wear special clothing and they have a look about them like you got to believe what they say, right? You're this little kid, and you better believe what these people tell you. You can't question what they say. See, they wear that collar. They have a special collar, and they've read a lot of books. They've read a lot more books than you've read, and they've gone to special schools, and they've learned, and they know. And you can't question them. You cannot have an argument with them. It's either their way or the highway, and you have to accept their teaching. And if you in any way question it or try to overanalyze it, you're out. We don't want you around us, right? You don't belong to our group. Get away. So, in order to be accepted socially, you have to kind of go along with them and pretend and just blah blah blah, and put on an act and pretend that you really are this way and you're really not, just so people will accept you. And in your heart of hearts, it's all a silly story. They're just stories and like fables and sayings and they're bits and pieces of a history of certain people that lived in an area of the world at a certain time on the Earth's history. They just happen to be the people that started writing things down a lot, right? And they kept records, and so that's where writing began. Reading and writing, basically, in Western society. I guess in India they had the Sanskrit, which predates any of the Old Testament, from what I understand it about the Upanishads. Maybe that's what I don't know. Maybe look it up. But to take a story and not really understand the story or put it maybe in proper context. Let me give you an example of that. They came up to Jesus when he was with his followers, and they said, you got to pay a tax. And so Jesus said, go to the pool in the area over there, go to that pool and get a fish, and then cut it open, or get some fish. Maybe it was a big fish, right? Probably was a big fish. Cut it open, and there is money in that fish. You can pay with that. So somebody went to the pool and they found that big fish, and they did. They took it and they cut it open. And they opened it up, and there was a coin in there. So it was like, that's a miracle. Oh, he made a coin appear inside of a fish. Oh, wow, it was magic. It's magic. Oh. No, and there was another time. A guy, he was a really good storyteller, and everything he talked about was really interesting, and people were following him around, right? They wanted to hear what he'd say next. He's telling stories. He was really good, entertaining. So the guy that was telling stories, he walked way out in the wilderness, away from the town, and everybody followed him. And then it started getting late, and people were getting hungry, and he took some fish that he had nearby, and he took a few loaves of bread that he had nearby, right? Because everybody was hungry, and he took it and he raised it up, and he said the words, and then he broke it apart, and he started handing it out. And he took the fish, a couple pieces of fish, and he took it, raised it up, and said some words, and he started handing it out to everybody. And then all of a sudden, all of this food just appears, right? Fishes appear, bread appears. It's magic. It's a miracle. It's miraculous. It's wonderful. Look, bread appears magically. Fish appears magically. No. What happened was there was probably a lot of the people in the crowds that were like had fish and bread that were stuffed in their coats, right? They weren't letting anybody else know they had it because they knew, hey, I'm gonna go out. I want to follow this guy around. He's kind of interesting. I like to hear what he says. Well, let me grab something to eat first before I go. He goes away because he's starting to walk away. I better go back to my house and I'll stuff some bread in my coat pocket here, and I have a couple fish. I'm gonna put them in here in this pocket. No one will see. And then they run out and they follow the guy out. He's listening to the guy telling stories out, and everybody's out there. And so what happened was all the other people were doing the same thing. They weren't dumb, right? So they had food on their person. So people just shared what they had with everybody else. And I guess people, to me, they see, it was always assumed. I mean, I was taught this way. Oh, it was a miracle. That something outside of the normal laws of the natural order of things it went against the normal natural order. So some event happened and it broke the natural law. And that's what made the stories special. Is that people were interested in that. It's like if you went to see a movie, right? In the movie, they had like something like it was you were on the edge of your seat and you were really waiting to see what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? You're waiting and waiting in the movie and you're into listening to the dialogue and you're really like, wow, this is like an interesting show. And it grabs your attention. Well, in ancient times, early storytellers, they had to do the same thing. They had to use drama. They had to keep people interested in hearing a story. They had to give it flair. And because that's what people did is they sat around. There was like a wise teacher that would be in the marketplace, and he'd sit on the edge of the stoop on where the marketplace was, and he'd tell all these kids and youngsters, and he'd sit there and he'd tell them stories all day long. But this was before there was writing, right? People think, oh, there must have been writing tablets back then. There must have been like office depot reams of paper, right? They had stacks of notepads and pieces of paper they could just in pens and pencils laying around. People think that's the way it was back in that time, and it wasn't. There was hardly very, 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 very few people that could read. And then the people that could read, there was probably like fewer people that could write, even have the means and the necessary implement, the stylus with the ink and the paper or the parchment or the animal skin or the piece of clay tablet, perfectly flat clay, and they're able to write it down. That was probably really, really rare that there was people that were doing that or could do that. And when they had something written down, it was very, very valuable. They had to put it in a special concealed in a wood box and wrap it up really good to protect it from the elements, to keep it from deteriorating. So if you wrote something down, it wasn't like just today where you have an easy way to write, So in ancient times, things were, imagine being alive during the time of Christ. Imagine if you were there in Jerusalem or in Nazareth and you were walking around and Jesus Christ was alive and another person, he was walking around too. So imagine living in that. If you're a Christian, imagine being in that time period and then believing the way you do now. But it would just be what I'm saying, like there's something that was brought to my attention about Buddhism in the early writings of Buddha. I think Alan Watts, he said something like, if somebody said something that seemed like it was really smart, and they said something very wise, right? That was very this is true, and someone heard that and they said Buddha had to, and they heard it, and somebody else said it to somebody else, and then someone that was writing, they knew how to write. They said, "Oh, Buddha, but Buddha said that. Gautama Buddha," and they said they wrote down the sayings of the Buddha, and Buddha maybe he just wasn't one guy. Maybe Buddha maybe the sayings, the writings we have today of what Buddha said, that could have been from other people as well. So they made a composite on Buddha of all the other teachers, wise people. They just used Buddha. They referenced to Buddha's name, because that was, oh, that's what Buddha would say. So they would give him credit for that. And so I thought about that, and I thought, well, why wouldn't the Gospels, couldn't that have kind of been the way some of the Gospels are? Couldn't that Jesus of Nazareth, he was this one person, right? But then there was someone else who lived in that same time period, or in the around that area, that had there was a doctor. They knew really medicine really good, right? And they could apply mud and paste. They could know how to handle people, massage their parts of their body and help them to get well. They knew about herbs and about certain spices and using smoke to calm people down. And so they were like the town druggist, right? Or the town doctor. And they could do certain things. And then there was another guy, he was like an orator. He was he had a really good voice, and he could talk really, he could talk, and he was really loud, and people would hear him from far away. And then there was someone else that was really wise, and they knew about, they've read all these ancient scrolls. They know about their customs and about all the traditions of their forefathers. And they were really knowledgeable about their religion, about Judaism, and about their family history. And that was the person that his name, that's where the name came from. And then all these other people, when they started writing the stories down, because remember, word of mouth, someone tells someone else, they tell someone else, they tell someone else. They tell this person, that person tells this person, that person tells this person. And then after so many people tell the stories, it's only after a long period of time, like a generation, right, when it's finally written down verbatim. It's not like while that person was alive, there was somebody writing it down while they were, oh, he's doing this, he says this, oh, he goes here, he says this, up, he goes here, he references this back. Yeah, there's not a reporter right then and there, real time, writing things down while this is happening. No, it's the stories that are being told and passed on, word of mouth, over many years, and then finally it's written down. So if you think about a guy that was really good at medicine, that was good at doctoring and healing, another guy who had a really good voice, he could talk really well and speak really well, he was loud, and he told stories and people listened to him. And there was another guy that was a Jew that understood his religion really well, and he was very devout to his forefathers, and he had a deep respect for his parents, and they just said, oh, that must have been that guy. He did that. This guy did that. The guy that was the Jewish guy, yeah, he said that. Yeah, he went there, yeah, and the people were healed, and that, and this, and that. So it wasn't just the one guy. It was a compilation of different men that had that characteristic, and they just, after the story was told so many times, they said it must have been the first guy. It must have been Jesus of Nazareth that said that. Or it must have been Jesus of Nazareth that healed that man. Or it must have been Jesus of Nazareth that sat on the mount and was able to talk to all the people, and they heard him. Or he gave advice to people. He was really smart in that. But so really, maybe it was 3 people, right? Or 4 people, or some. I'm just saying, over time, before things got written down, there was talk and talk and talk and talk. So, and I was raised in my family, we were Christian, so we had fish on Friday, and, my parents they had lettuce and salads once in a while. We had a lot of dairy too. We had, eating cottage cheese and drinking a lot of milk and eating cheese, different kinds of cheeses. And so as a youth, I was raised a Christian home, and it was in Southern California in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, the only vegetarian that I knew of was the Hare Krishnas over there off of Venice Boulevard, in Culver City, or Venice, Culver City, I think it is. Um, so I think I was influenced by. I killed a bird once with a rock. I was throwing rocks, and I threw a rock, and it hit a bird in midair, and I killed it. And at first, I kind of was like, oh, blah, 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 like, happy, right? Oh, I hit a bird. I felt all proud of myself. Oh, look what I did, like that, just for like a minute. And then I walked up to the bird. It was like its little feathers was flapping, and it was on there on the ground. And it kind of made me feel guilty. I felt a little bit off, that was terrible. That shouldn't, it's like, why did I do that? Was that really necessary? And then it was the same thing with like fishing. I went fishing with my dad, and we used to, I had a Zebco caster, and I cast it out with salmon eggs on a lake and a little float, and catch a fish and reel them in, and then it'd be flopping around. I'd grab the pliers, and I'd take the needle nose pliers, and I'd try to take the hook and pull it out of its mouth. And it'd be flopping around. And I do remember eating it. I remember frying it in a pan. I remember cutting it up and frying it in a pan, and taking the bones off and eating it, putting salt on it, pepper on it. It was good. It tasted so good. And I'll never forget that. And then time with my dad too, bonding, with my father. So it wasn't, I don't regret that I've eaten meat like it was normal. There was I didn't get someone come up to me as a youth and explain to me about farm animals. Hey, kid, those eggs you ate, they came from a bird, and that bird had to endure being in a cage. It probably wasn't comfortable. It didn't live a very pleasant life as a bird. Or that cow out there in the field, right, that you're seeing eating the grass, that burger that you're eating, that cow, what happened to that cow to make it that burger? You don't really, as a kid, and there was never anybody, making me really think about that. There was no Facebook, so if somebody posts put something on Facebook, and they'll show like rhesus monkeys, right? They'll have these monkeys, tiny little monkeys, and they'll put them in these cages, and they'll constrain their necks, put them in like a what was that they did in the old days, like the Salem, the early pilgrims, they had them in stockades, right? They put their arms in their head, and they closed a piece of wood on them so they couldn't move. It's called the stockade, I think. And they had to stay in the middle of town, right, in the stockade as a punishment. Well, these rhesus monkeys, they got them in the same. They're like being tortured. So they can experiment. They can determine whether or not this thing they're putting inside of their brain. So they drill a hole. They cut their skin on their head, and then they drill a hole in their skull with a drill. And they drill it all the way down inside of their brain, and then they take a wire and they stick wires inside of the monkey's skull and try to wire it to the inside of their brain, and then they hook the wires up to other things or whatever, and they measure it. Or they try to send electricity into the brain of the monkey, and they have all these wires inside of the monkey's head. And that's terrible that they're torturing this poor critter. And someone would say, hey, they're doing that for humans, they're trying to make the life better for people, so that the human race will evolve. So humans will become more better, more powerful, more stronger, more bigger, more better. So shut up. Let them do that. Let them experiment on those monkeys. Stop making a big deal out of it. Be a man. Grow up. This is what we do for technology. We have to do this for modern technology. We have to stick wires in the brains of monkeys. Sorry, get over it. And they say that. And there's like people like me that are like really sensitive about animals that are like contacting organizations that are trying to are lobbying, right? They go to Washington, D.C. and they lobby just so that they don't do that. They write letters. They say they're going to, they contact the universities, all these places where there's people supposed to be learning, right, going on. There young people are supposed to be gaining some knowledge but the price you pay, right? Even if they experiment on 1,000 monkeys, and that's miserable. That's a misery. Some little animal has to be tormented in a misery for one monkey. A whole life of a monkey's like is in a nightmare, right? If there was a rebirth, if your consciousness was rebirthed in another form, right, another kind of organism, and you happen to rebirth your soul, your entity, your consciousness was rebirthed in that kind of an animal, and you were in a laboratory. But that's where, okay, you need to see a doctor. I'm sorry, there's something, you need to have your head examined. There's something wrong with you. You got issues. They would say that. They would say, why, you're not thinking of the rewards. Think about that university. Just think about all the money that they'll make from those monkeys. Those clinicians and those people that are performing these procedures on these animals, the people that work in the laboratory, the people that work for that company, the people that go to those colleges that are doing that in these research labs, right? And they're doing vivisection on live monkeys, and they're cutting them open, putting things inside of their head and tying them down. Why are you being so sensitive? Stop it. Be a man, grow up, grow some balls, right? They'd say they can do that. That's not against the law. Take them to court, take them to court, take it to the Supreme Court, make laws against that. That's what they'll say. They'll say, as long as it's legal, we can do it. And they don't care. They're cold, they're heartless, they're cruel, they're vicious, mean, evil people that don't care about the feelings of smaller beings that are lesser than them, that are helpless, that are weak and at their mercy, right? If they want to give them anesthesia or anesthetics or not, or be kind to them, they don't have to. They're just like another piece of equipment. They're just handling that monkey like it's like a piece of electronics or any other kind of a device or an object. And people would say to me, well, they can do that. It's not against the law. There is no animal rights provision written into the Constitution, right? They'd say that. So the Bill of Rights only applies to human beings. It doesn't apply to animals. And then you have okay, if somebody even hints or gives any kind of indication that they're going to damage someone else, they're going to trespass, and they're going to cause property damage, then at the slightest hint that anyone even mentions that or says they're going to do that, or they know somebody that's doing that, or they're talking about it, right? Then the authorities are contacted, and that person is monitored. There's someone that's in charge of, and their job is to make sure whatever that person says or monitor their conversation and their ideas, right? So they might keep a close watch on them and make sure they're not going to break into a farm or a slaughterhouse, or they're going to, go to a slaughterhouse where big slaughterhouses are. They're going to do anything to damage the fence or leave anything around that property or interfere with trucks that are coming and going that are taking the pigs or the chickens or the cows to that one area to be butchered. So they're not interfering with anyone else's job, right? They're not at the grocery store in the meat aisle with wearing like a white apron with blood all over it and with a bullhorn shouting at people that are buying the packaged meats, and in the meat aisle they're shouting at them, that's cruelty to animals, those animals suffered, you are evil, you are wrong, you should be vegan, right? They're telling everybody that you're cruel, you're a mean person, right? And the manager of the store will come up to them and say, please leave, you're interfering with our customers, they're not comfortable with you here, you're causing a disturbance, if you don't leave, we're going to call the police. Now we're asking you politely now to leave the premises. So who's ever with a bullhorn with the blood on their all there and they're walking around shouting in the meat aisle with the bullhorn, they have to leave. And it would be right, and the guy that he goes to a wedding, right? And they have a meal after the bride and the groom drink the champagne and they cut the cake, and then they have a meal and they have a nice tray set out with sliced roast beef, and then they have sliced turkey, smoked, and they have like different kinds of cheeses and wines, and they have like lobster and crab and shrimp and all these meats set up there. And one of the people that was invited to the wedding, they get all drunk, right? And they start drinking champagne, and they start shouting at everybody, look what you're doing, you're eating those animals, you are cruel to the animals, you're participating in their death, their blood is on your hands, you should be vegan, you should eat only vegetables, plants, you should not hurt animals, you should not participate in eating meat, this is wrong. And they're going to say, you got to leave, we're sorry, you're just making a disturbance, and we thought, you've had too much to drink, we're asking you to leave, if you're not going to leave, we'll have our bouncers come and push you out, throw you out, because it's a rental hall, right? We're there for a wedding. And that's wrong. People that do that and get in other people's faces, or even people that are like trying to enjoy a meal, right? They're in a restaurant and they're trying to enjoy a meal, and then somebody next to them starts berating them and talking saying ugly things about them while they're trying to eat their big ribeye steak that they paid, $100 for or whatever. And they're just like aggravating this person that's trying to sit there and enjoy their steak. So the person that's enjoying their steak, that's got this person that's having this talk that's sitting in another table in the same room, and they're just blah, blah, blah. They're chomping at the bit, yammering their gums on about cruelty to animals and about factory farming and about how animals suffer and we shouldn't kill animals for food. And so that would be I would see how someone would not like vegan people, and like and then you got to consider jobs. I mean, people have to make a livelihood. You got to put food on the table. You got to make a living. You got to bring in a paycheck. So a lot of work and a lot of jobs involve like animal products, or so, handling meat, carving up meat, packaging food, meat and products, and or maybe you're a cook and you're cooking meat a lot. So it's not like, or you're a farmer and that's what your dad did. You know how to do it well, and you only learned you learned 4-H. You didn't really learn any other trade. And you went to college and became like really knowledgeable about taking care of animals, so you learned the animal veterinarian skills, and you actually are really good at understanding like breeding, how to breed certain qualities and characteristics out of this type of animal to get these kinds of results. And all about ventilating barns and what kind of feed the animals should have. And so your whole life is revolved around learning, breeding, taking care of animals, feeding animals, and then selling them. So, or you're a truck driver and that's the company you work for, and you're like somebody that comes along and says, oh, everybody should start eating plants and seeds, nuts and roots and leaves and grains and drinking beverages made out of nuts and seeds and and different kinds of grains, and have everybody only eat plant-based meats. If they want meat, then they buy plant-based meat. And there's no more. You go to the grocery store and it's all plant-based meat. So if you want real meat, you got to go to the specialty store, right? And it's way on the other side of town. It's only that one place because of religion, right? So somebody still eats that because of the religion. And I'm seeing in the future, right? I'm seeing they're able to make plant-based meats taste so good and be healthier and cost less money, that people will stop eating animal products. I think, I believe, or I guess, or I prognosticate that in the future, more and more and more and more people will become plants, will eat more plants, more on the food chain of plant products. And I'm betting a lot. I'm betting a significant amount of my portfolio is hedged towards those kind of industries and businesses. So you could say, well, I'm trying to promote a plant-based diet. I say I'm vegan, and I show shorts of cooking sausages or meatballs, or like cooking frozen plant-based chicken, or showing like a short of hemp milk, right, or oat milk or something. And I'm trying to describe my mental problem I have in the world, and that is in most of the community. In the community I live in, everybody eats meat most of the time. So there's a kind of a strangeness, maybe an oddness about me that might be threatening to people, or that they would then again they would see, oh, he has a mental illness, so I eat only plants and I don't eat any animal products because I have a mental illness. He thinks the animal has a soul. He thinks the animals, farmed animals, have a soul or souls. So he don't want his eating habit to make a slave. He doesn't want the habit of his eating to have to cause a slave to be bred, a slave to create a food for the person that eats it. So they want to not participate in that part of society because they think that the animal has consciousness, that the animal has self-awareness, that the animal has an experience of itself being alive as a being, independent being, a feeling, emotive being that's alive and aware of itself. They don't want to be cruel. If they bought meat and they ate the meat, they would know that they are participating in the chain of events that led to that's encouraging those kinds of processes to occur in the world. So if their eating habits make it so that they don't need someone there to cut up meat. They don't need a guy to butcher a cow. They don't need the guy to like artificially inseminate a cow. They don't need someone there to have to walk with this big animal in mud and in steam or in heat and flies. They don't want that. They don't want to pay for that to happen in the world. So they think in their mind, they think of a pig farm, and then they think of a flood, and then they think of a whole pig farm being flooded and all this flood water washing into a pig farm, and not all that flood water washing a pig farm goes to a town, goes into everybody's houses, and all that smelly water from the pig lagoon, that was containing all the pig urine and the pig shit, all of a sudden the flood water came in and washed that into the town. So Someone like me doesn't want to buy a product that could involve that happening in the industry. They don't want to be part of that. So they think of that, and then they think that ROI, the ROI, right? The ROI is inefficient. They would argue that the return on investment, the input and the output, and return on investment from the amount of energy into the what you get out of the system is like proportionally to any plant-based food is way more higher on the energy, on the higher up on the energy chart, right? So the animal products use more fuel, use more energy from all electricity, for natural gas, for growing feed, from hauling the feed in the trucks to feeding the animals, to the grain, storing it, and all the input costs of the water. It took all that water to grow the grain to feed the animal. That same input could have been way less for plant-based. So, but you would argue that no, you would argue against that person. No, you would say, oh no, they can take them other animals and let them out in the wild areas. They could just let their animals roam around in the wild, all the wild areas, and then herd them back in, and they get plenty of water, they get plenty of grass, they get plenty of cactus. They are happy, they eat, and they're fat, and then they come back, no problem, they would say. But I would argue about the current conditions in the Colorado Plateau and what's happening with the watershed. La Nina is causing the atmosphere is not as it doesn't react the same way as when the polar ice was there. So when the when the polar region was more colder in the past, the weather systems were different. Now that there's less ice in the polar regions, the weather is changing. And it's not, people will say, oh, but it'll go back to normal. Oh, this is just a phase. It's happened before. Look, it happened before. It'll get back. It'll right itself. And the winter will come, and they'll get lots of snow. They'll get tons of snow in the mountains in the Colorado, and the Colorado River will get high again, and it'll rush through, and it'll fill the dam, fill Lake Mead, Lake Powell. Everything will be fine. Everybody will be happy. There'll be plenty of water for the next 5 or 6 years from a big snowpack. So they'll say, don't worry about it. Well, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And then some people like are investors, right? And they're investing in the stock market, and they never hear a peep about climate change, right? They listen at conference calls. They read articles about businesses and about what they're doing and about companies, but they're very, very rarely, right? They don't never mention climate change in the meetings, and then when you hear the conference calls. No. The gentleman that was he's the CEO of Fresh Del Monte. He did talk about the input costs changing because of the margins being reduced because of the crop failures. So, but as an investor, I want to know, well, if the Lake Powell and Lake Mead dry up, if Lake Mead and Lake Powell and the Colorado River, the whole Colorado Basin stays dry, if it's dry this winter, if this next winter, if we don't get a good snow, heavy snow in that region, so that the reservoirs, the streams and the reservoirs fill back up, then there's going to be more water rationing. Now, however they have water rationed before, even in South Africa, in Johannesburg, they had to ration water really strictly. I think, well, what might happen is they might have the water turned on. They might have to turn everybody's water off, especially in the big cities. So they'd have to turn everybody's waters off at certain times of the day. Like they'd turn the water off at 8 in the morning and turn it back on at 6 p.m. at night. And so what that would do is that would like discourage people from, if they had to use water outside and they were spraying water in the air, they were watering their plant or their gardens or something, then it wouldn't evaporate away as fast as if that water was in the daytime. So they could restrict the use of water at certain times by turning it off, actually. So they'd have to do that. And the other thing they might have to do is they might have to build a pipeline to Lake Tahoe. So they build a pipeline to Lake Tahoe, or make a tunnel, right? They tunnel under the mountain into Lake Tahoe and use the water in Lake Tahoe and use that for irrigation. That's another thing they could do. I always thought that the Salton Sea, that they would want that to be at sea level. That the height of the Salton Sea, they could like take a canal, or they could build a bigger canal from Baja Sea of Cortez, and they could actually have the water flow into the Salton Sea, and it'd fill it up to sea level. And if they did that, then all the surface area on the surface water of Salton Sea, even if it was really saline and salty, it would evaporate into the air, and that would cause more condensation downwind, or from west to east. So wherever the direction of the air moves, the water would evaporate off the sea, Salton Sea. It would cause maybe more rainfall in the southwest. So that would be another thing they could do. And if Hoover Dam, if they can't generate electricity from the dams on the Colorado River, then they're going to have to come up with another way of the hydropower to produce electricity. So it might be solar. And I think solar has a future. I think in the Southwest United States, that solar is going to, whatever solar is percentage of the total amount of power produced now, that's going to double, triple, quadruple in the renewable energy sector. I just bought stock in a company, and they're using gravity to store potential energy to generate electricity from. So they build these structures out in the desert, and inside of the structure are these like bays, aisles, and they have weights that they're rising. They pick up these weights, and as they have excess power coming off the solar or wind, then they use that excess power that's not being used for the grid. They lift all these weights up inside of this building, right? And the weights are made out of like ground up wind turbines and sand and the native soil in the area, right? So they're not using local materials, and they're generating electricity when they're lowering the weights, and then they're storing the electricity with motors when they're picking up the weights. And they have these huge buildings. And I think I bought 25 shares. I think I paid like $3.97 or something, $3.98 a share. And I'm an optimistic person when it comes to the markets. I try to be. I follow the doomers because the doomers, they seem to be the only one that are listening to like the meteorologists and the scientists. And like when that was like another reason to be, this is the reason why I'm an antinatalist, right? because of climate change. So, but an antinatalist is somebody that thinks it's not right, it's wrong, immoral, unethical to intentionally bring another person here. And as far as my understanding of it, it's perfectly clear to me the number one main reason why people are antinatalists like me is because they know they're going to die someday. And why would you want someone else to have to become alive so that they get experience knowing they're going to have to die someday? Deal with that, right? Be haunted by it, be plagued by that, knowing in the back of their mind, eating, knocking on the back of their head, it's coming, it's closer, you're closer to the grave, you're closer. Every day you're getting closer to the grave. You're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. Always thinking about death, what's going to happen to you personally when you die, and be like hounded by, it's going to end, I'm going to end, I'm going to be gone, what's going to happen to me, and like worrying and foreboding about the future, about that. And you want someone else to do that, to have to go through what you go through and experience, be thinking about that and experience that? No. If I have the seeds of other potential people living inside of my body, I don't want those seeds to cause someone else to come into existence. I would be afraid. I would be absolutely mortified if I was a part of someone coming into the world. Now I know better, but as a young adult, as a youth, that was horny most of the time, that learned early on sex education, even in my grade school. The coach would come in there and they chalkboard and they pass out the booklets and talk about how your body's going to change and about what happens to your hair grows, and about what girls are going through, blah blah blah. Basics when you're just like, you're 14 or 12 years old, or 13 years old, 12, and you grow up and you're like afraid of you're afraid of copy. You'd like to have sex with a girl. You imagine yourself having sex. You fantasize about having sex. But as a young man, you relieve yourself. You stimulate yourself and relieve yourself habitually, so you never really copulate. You never go with a girl all the way and copulate with her, because that maybe your face is like covered with acne and you're awkward. You don't know what to say. Maybe you stutter a little, or you have the girl will get flirtatious, but you don't know. Well, how do I talk to you? What are you talking about? She starts getting smiling and flirtatious, and you don't know how to respond, or it's not appropriate. You're there. You're like on a beach, or you might be at a lake or a river or somewhere swimming, and the girls there, like, they're wearing a real small bikini. That shows a lot of their crotch area, and they have their bikini top slips, and their breast hangs out, and their breasts are hanging out, and they pull their bikini top up, and then they bend over and they're picking something up off their towel, and you're a man and you're watching this girl on the beach, right, dude, with her really small bikini bottoms, and it's you just keep looking at her and thinking about her, and then as soon as that, then you just ooh, and then wow, and then you go in the water and you wash up, right, come back on the beach and lay back on your towel. Don't think anything of it. So as a youngster, you habitually do things that may or may not. So you never really copulated. And then when you did have a girlfriend, you just were like did fellatio all the time. It was her. She got down on you, and you got down on her. There was a lot of oral sex. There was not any. Um, so that is a sense that could happen, and that would be like, well, he wasn't the captain of the football team, so he didn't get the cheerleader and the cheerleading squad, and he didn't, and he didn't his dad didn't give him a box of condoms of different sizes, right? So he didn't know. Dad just gave him a couple boxes of different size condoms and says, "Oh, have a good time, have fun, be careful, you know, don't do anything dumb, don't drink too much, send the kid down. They go out on a date unchaperoned, right?" So there was a lot of that happening in high school. Now I see, like, I was a junior in high school. The girl I knew, I had a crush on her too. She was pregnant. Oh my god. Oh no. Oh. I looked at her in the hall. I'd watch her walking up and down the hall, going to her locker. Right. I see her big belly. Right. And I think to myself, oh no, she's got to grow up. Right. She can't be a kid anymore. Right. I was like feeling like sorry for her, it felt a little bit like, wow, I don't want that, I don't want that some girl I don't want to cause some girl to have to go through that. I was thinking to myself, I want to try to prevent that for myself from never that ever happening. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of like, and just fantasizing, right, just using my own imagination and thinking a lot, having a very picturesque mind. Um, it wasn't like when I was 14, 15 years old. I remember it wasn't like I needed to look at a magazine. Okay, I didn't need to look at a movie or see some. I would look at girls in real life, like if I was at the swimming pool, or I was at the river, or I was like camping out in the campground in the summer, where there were girls I knew, and they would be really wearing hardly any clothing at all. Right? They would just like wear a t-shirt and get wet, and then they have you know, their shorts on under that, and it was a lot of being flirtatious. But there was nobody that was like buying condoms and giving me condoms and encouraging me to go out and just be free. Please the girl full on, just, but don't, make sure I had wore my raincoat, wore the rubber properly and all that. So there was never anyone that was doing that. So it was Catholic school. Because I was in Catholic school, the priests and the nuns who were in charge of the school, they they weren't passing out, or they weren't distributing prophylactics to the men, to the boys. And I imagine if the priests were giving the, the seniors or the juniors at the high school, if they were giving them condoms, the football players, and then they would just allow them to have sex, right? As long as they wore condoms. And I'm sure the parents would be notified that they have like a permission slip, right? So the parents would sign a waiver giving the school, uh, allowing the school nurse, right, to distribute the condoms to the students. But they never did that at the high school I went to. So why am I talking about the high school I went to? Why am I talking about sex so much? Because I think it's like you can't just go to a dinner party with your coworkers. You can't go sit down with your cousins and your aunt and uncles. You can't go to can't meet up with a bunch of people in your neighborhood and talk about certain subject matters. You can't go to church and go to a church meeting and sit around and talk about subject matters. So you get on a public forum and you start discussing things that are like, you know what? I've watched a lot of people's videos and over a long time, and I'm trying to see what they don't talk about, right? So, and usually they don't talk about their own personal life too much. They try to limit their talking to about subjects that their audience can relate to, right? So and the audience, they want to hear something they've never heard before. They want someone to say something that no one else has talked about that in that same way that they're talking about the subject matter. The small craft carrier. I'm sorry, just got here. What's the topic? Well, it was about people that are overly sensitive to farm animals and animals that are like in circuses and animals being raised on farms for meat or for fur, animals that are being confined, that are being mistreated, abused, eating pets. Like if you had a bird, if you had a parakeet, or if you had a cockatiel and you just grabbed it out of the cage and you twisted it and broke its neck, and then you picked all the feathers off, right? And you had all the skin there, and then you took it and put it in the oven and cooked your cockatiel with some gravy, right, or sauces and all that. You start eating your cockatiel, or your cat, or your dog, right? Let's say you're looking at your dog and you were hungry, and you just went up to your dog and you took a knife and slit its throat real fast, and bled it and hung it upside down, then skinned it, right? Scraped all the fur off, right? And then cut it open and gutted it, and then you put it on. You went outside and you put it on your barbecue, right? And you turned your barbecue on. You were out there flipping it. It was ribs were there, and it was cooking on the barbecue. And you put barbecue sauce on it, salted it, and closed it, and smoked it a little, and barbecued your dog. Then ate your dog. But then someone that was like went to the grocery store and they saw chicken, they saw turkey, they saw pieces of pig, they saw pieces of cows, they saw parts of animals on display in packages, and they thought, wow, I'm born a human being. I could have been born that kind of animal. I could have been trapped in a body of another kind of creature. Someone might say, "Oh, you're crazy. You're nuts. Those animals, they're bred. They're property. They're owned. They're allowed to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Their dads did that. Their grandfather did that. Their cousins and their nieces and nephews, and they all are farmers, and they raise animals, and they work for slaughterhouses, and they work in the business and the animal business, and that's food that feeds people. And someone has every right to go into the grocery store and buy whatever they can buy off the grocery aisle, and put that and take it home and cook it and eat it. They have a right to do that. That's perfectly legal and normal and natural for someone to do that. For someone that thinks that, oh, that farm animal is like a person, like they're slaves, right? Like the animals are tormented slave. They're beings that are they're trapped in those animal bodies, and they're slaves, and they can't go. They're having to do whatever happens to them. They're forced. This is forced on to happen to them, and they suffer. No, they're the property of the farmer. Breeds those animals for food. Their property and their food. They feed people. That's good. That's nutrition. That's healthy. That's normal. That's right. And you would respond back to them. You would say, my knowledge is of nutrition that I have. What my knowledge of nutrition that I've learned through reading and listening to lectures, podcasts, is that I can satisfy all of my nutrient needs of my body with food derived only from plants. And then they would argue, they would say, no, you're not going to get enough protein. You're going to miss your DHAs are going to be down. Your omega fatty 3 acids are, you're going to have to get, you're going to get anemic. You're going to get dark circles under your eyes. You're going to get pale and all weak, and your bones will break really easy. Your fingernails will start breaking. You have skin problems, and they'll say you got to eat meat. Animal products are part of our diet. You would say that that's natural and normal, and that anybody that says otherwise, they're a fool. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not an MD. Don't listen to them. And they would say it's perfectly nutritional. You need to eat animal products. They would argue that to me. And from like May of 2011, after my dad died of brain cancer, I became a vegan. So I've been vegan since 2011, and what I've noticed, right? Sometimes, like, my fingernails will get weak, right? I'll notice like they'll break easy, or I'll get a cuticle. It'll break. It'll split, and it'll go to the cuticle. That was happening. What else was I noticing that was different? Well, I get acne because I put the coffee creamer. The dry, I've used that, so I'm not 100% vegan. See, somebody might say, you're not you're a hypocrite. Yeah, blah, you're a hypocrite because you ate a donut and it had egg in it, or you ate that candy and it had milk in it, the chocolate, or look what you're wearing, leather gloves. You're working in your yard and you're wearing leather gloves. You're a hypocrite. Or they'd say, you got a belt on that's leather, your shoes are leather, or the car seat in your car. You're a hypocrite. You're a leather car seat, or you're like they say, the animals had to have the shit, and they use the animal shit from those animals, and they put it on the fields, and it helps grow the vegetables you like, right? So they'd say the tomato plants have blood meal in them that was from the renderings at the slaughterhouse, so they used that, made blood meal and bone meal that put on all the nut trees and all the fruit trees and the gardens and the vegetables and all that, get the blood meal and the bone meal spread on the soil, fertilizers from the urine from the pig farm, or the pig lagoon, pig lagoons. They make that into fertilizer or whatever. So, and they farm and all that those plant-based diet you have is all because of inputs from shit from animals. So they may point their finger at me, and accuse me, you're a hypocrite, blah blah blah, and I would I would probably pause and I'd nod my head, yeah, a little bit. And I say, yeah, I ate a donut. It had egg in it. And I probably should have looked at the donut and thought, I probably shouldn't eat that because it has egg in it. And it's not really, but prove to me, you tell me you're nutritional, you're malnourished. They would tell me that. They would say, you're malnourished. I'm 62 years old. I've been vegan since 2011. And they'd say, oh, I'm malnourished. Say, I'm not getting enough protein. They would tell me that. Do I look malnourished? Do I look weak, anemic? Do you see dark circles under my eyes? Do I look pale? Do I look like any way? Do I look like I'm malnourished? So last time I went to the doctor, I just had a blood test. That's all. So I was having a medical exam once a year for my insurance, and they draw blood, and I'd mentioned to the doctor before the blood test that I'm vegan. Can you look for anything that would be a deficiency when you do my blood work, when you look at it? And they said, yeah, we have to run another test. It's another, costs more or whatever. So I opted into that, and everything was fine. My iron levels was fine. My thiamine level, my folic acid, all of my vitamins, my oils, fatty acids, my blood pH, everything was good. I was not in any way suffering from any kind of malnourishment, any kind of deficiency. So someone that would say to me, to my face, that's not healthy. You have to have animal products in your diet. Somebody came up to me and said that to me, I'd know they were a liar. You're a bald-faced liar. You say that, and you think I'm going to believe what you say, and I'm living proof to myself that living plant-based. So you can call me crazy because I emote. Oh, I look at animal. I see animal as someone else. I see a person in the animal. I just don't see a surface of the animal. I see actually beneath the surface, and I think that's holy, right? It's holy. That whatever that being is holy, and you need to respect. You need to respect that it's having an experience while it's alive. And for me, I'm showing respect by not being in any way participating. I'm trying not to participate in anything having to do with breeding that animal or raising the animal or slaughtering the animal or packaging the animal or shipping the animal. So I'm trying to stay as much away from that as possible in my lifestyle because of that. So, but I think if I would join one of those cubes, and I'd stand there and I'd hold a big screen and I'd show it, what was happening in a slaughterhouse. I'd try to do that. If I lived in a bigger city, probably do stuff like that. But I live out here in the country, and when you live in a rural area that's more like country areas, that it's a common practice for people to always be having barbecues all over and having roasts and even parties where they have big barbecue parties and everybody's out there Um, and of course, you don't want to be there because you don't want to be around the people you don't want to be around them because of what they're eating. So you're avoiding people, socializing with people, being away from other people. Out, every meal you have all by yourself in your house. There's no one else around. And the people that you know that they don't respect you because you have a mental. They think you have a mental illness. Um, towards other animals. Um, and they don't want to be around you anymore. They don't want to be friendly to you. They don't want to be in your presence. So it's not. You go home and you have burgers and hot dogs and eat roast beef and cut up fish and cook different kinds of meats in your house and for all your meals. And you come over to my house and I'm like eating salad and beans and rice and so and then now they don't want to hang out with you anymore. So well, that's okay. That's life. That's what happens. Everybody changes. Someone that you really liked at one time, they grow distant. You wear on them, right? So maybe I'm the kind of person, if you hang out with me, I'll wear you out. Maybe I talk too much, or I dominate the conversation too much, or but people that are like me, they usually live downtown, right? Well, they'll live in a big city in an urban area. People that are vegan people or vegetarians, they live more in that more into closer into downtown, right? Where all the where other people that are the same as them live. But yeah, you're out in the country. Live out in the country. It's different. Um, what was I going to talk about? Well, I got two thumbs up. What was the topic? Well, it was the title. I guess you could read the title. It's about I'm asking, maybe it should be a question, like, am I crazy? Is someone out of their mind if they think animals have souls?